Hello everyone. Thank you for coming to visit me here today. It's lovely to have you come by. What I would like to do today is to do another installment of the little series I'm working on to do with creating vintage style journal pages in quite a small format. Those of you who have watched my earlier videos might remember this little project. We covered that in 3 short videos, and today we're going to do a next one, which I'm also hoping to keep quite short. What we're going to do is to make a sort of flap out thing that we can fit on the back of this. I've done a certain amount of preparation already, but then the next step will be to create a journal card just like this. And I'm going to spend most of the time on that. This thing we will cover in a follow-up video because I'm trying to keep them all quite short. So today will be how you can watercolor something like this. And what I'm using, as you can probably see here, is the Tim Holtz Distress pencils. I find those perfect for this kind of thing. What I did notice is when I started to use these more and more, and I feel very fortunate that I now have the full collection, which I've sort of been building up over the weeks. What I did find was that the pigments are quite different from what we know from the other distress colors that most of us, I'm sure, are very familiar with. Yeah? So what I did for myself is I made these little palettes, which will make it much easier to choose the right colors. So before I spend too much time on talking to you, let's get started. I'll clear the space. I'll show you what we're going to use for this, and then we'll get on with it. All right, see you soon. Just as a little reminder, yeah? So this is what we did, and then we saw that the back needs covering. So the journal card we were going to work on is going to fit into this thing. We will attach it here, and then it can fold like this, or you can fold it right over like this. So lots of possibilities to create. And as you can see, we have these 3 pockets here. So what we're going to do today is create one of the journal cards that will fit into one of these pockets. Now, what are we going to use? As you can see from the example I did, yeah, we're going to use a stamp, obviously, and then we're going to do watercoloring using the Tim Holtz pencils, like I said. The stamp set I'm using is this one. It's EABF, the Special Berry Collection. And as you can see, I've chosen the bramble stamps. Now, the thing is, I want it to not be like this, but to hang down like that. Looking out of my window, there's brambles everywhere. And to me, that's what they look like as they are growing. Now, if you look carefully, you can see, actually, let's grab this again. If you look carefully, you can see that here at the bottom, there is some text. Now, if we're going to turn it round, the text would be upside down, but we can solve that, as you hopefully will see soon. Yeah, what I did was I stamped it again, put it on some fabric, stuck it on, well, cut it out, stuck it on, and you've got a nice little embellishment that adds some texture. We probably won't get round to all of that today, because now I really want to get on to the watercoloring. The colors I have chosen is a collection of these pencils, and I'll talk you through which ones they are as I start. But the first thing we need to do is stamp our image. So I'm going to take one of my journal cards. I've picked a stamp already. Like I said, I'm going to put it this way around. Yeah. So step number 1, stamping. I'm going to do what I did on the original little journal page. I'm going to stamp and emboss it. And as we carry on, you'll see why. So let's ink it up. And I'm using the Scorched Timber stamp because it's a nice dark brown one. It's nice and juicy still. So it will be easy to emboss. And then I'll use clear embossing powder. Again, like we did last time. I'll link the video where I did all that in more detail below. So you can always watch it if you haven't. So I'm going to stamp. Wish me good luck. I'm not the world's best stamper. Not too bad. So bring in the embossing powder. Tap it off a bit and quickly blast it with the heat gun to make it all nice and shiny and totally water resistant. Sorry for the noise, I hope it won't take too long. That should do it. All right. Now, like I said, we're going to use the Tim Holtz pencils. I'm also going to use a fine water brush, but to clean up between the different colors, I've also got a little jar of water here just to make sure I don't contaminate one color with another one. The color I'm going to start with is Dusty Concord. So off we go. I found the very best way to do this is wet your brush a little bit, put it down, and then just go over it to pick up some pigment. Of course, really, you could do this probably with any kind of water pencil, or water-soluble pencil, and most likely you can even do it with things like Neocolor 2, watercolor, crayons, any cheap watercolors as well, of course. Because I'm going to do the background with Distress inks, I think these colors just blend beautifully together. Now, why did I emboss it? Let's go over that. Can you see when you add the water? The lovely thing is when you use an embossed image, the paint won't get in the way of your stamping. Because the glossiness, because embossing powder, after all, is a kind of plastic, resists the watercolor paint. I went a bit over, that doesn't bother me at all. It's all loose, it's all alive. The background is partly going to cover that anyway, so it really doesn't bother me. Now, one of the things with watercoloring stamped images is you want to create depth. And one way to do that, of course, is to attempt to add light and shadow. So even though it's not quite dry yet, I'm adding some more pigment. I've decided the light is going to come in from here. So the darker side is going to be here. Add some more pigment. as long as the background is still a bit wet, as those of you who've watercolored before, of course, will be very aware of. The colours blend easily and won't make hard lines, which is really something we want to try and avoid. I still need a bit more pigment on the darker side, so going over it again, dabbing it on. Now, I think the colour at this point is a little bit too purple for my liking. So I'm going to add my next colour, which is going to be chipped sapphire, adds a bit more blue. And then finally, I'm going to add Villainous Potion, and perhaps I'll see what it looks like, even a little bit of black soot. It looks now as if the stamped outline is disappearing, but you will see as the paint dries, because they are translucent, the stamped imagery will start to appear again. So I'm not worried about that at this point. It's all still there and it will reappear. Okay, it's still a bit too purpley to my liking. So now we go on to the Villainous Potion. Where are you? No, that's the... Here we go. It's even more purple, I know that, but at least it's darker. Even though it doesn't show up at this point. Never mind. It's a little bit more on the lighter side as well now. Okay, and now my next step is going to be to add some black, to really bring it to that dark, dark berry colour. Anyway, every time you do something like this, things turn out a little bit differently. You never quite know what's going to happen, but that's all part of the discovery, the enjoyment, and so on. So now, time for all of this to dry a little bit. And while it does that, I'm now going to work on the leaves. I'm trying to achieve a natural looking green. The two colours I've chosen for that are Bundled Sage and Forest Moss. So I'm going to start working on these leaves because they're far away from the purple. That will give that more time to dry. I might have to take a heat gun to it in a moment, but we'll see how it goes. And again, we'll do the same thing. We'll add the first layer, and then when it's still wet, we go in again to add more pigment. I can probably manage to do 2 leaves at the same time. And you know, spending the time to do this really adds depth to it eventually, and it takes it away sort of from, you know, colouring book colouring. Okay, time for the darker colour. Always important to have some kitchen roll or similar underneath as well, to just dab off your brush on so that it doesn't get too wet. Colouring with watercolour is all about water control. It's anybody working with watercolour will tell you, of course. By the way, these journal cards are just cut from an old file folder. So I'm not using top quality watercoloring card or anything like that. Just cheap, but it works fine. I say cheap. It is cheap, but for us souls living in the UK, it can be pretty hard to get normal file folders. In the US, Australia and any of those places, it's so easy. I brought a whole bunch away with me, and I did once manage to order them as well on Amazon, I think. I don't know why we don't have them in the UK. They're so useful, especially for crafters. Well, and for office people too, I'm sure. There's so many different things you can do with them. Now that these pencils have been used a bit, the pigmentation has become much darker. They've softened and dissolved a little bit. So I'm going into these top leaves again as well to darken them a bit more. And darken them with the darker color. Now, what I haven't touched at all yet is these little petal leaves here. I think the purple is starting to dry. So very, very carefully, I'm going to whisk to start to color these in now as well. Few here still. All right, I think I am going to have to use the heat dryer for a little bit now, the heat gun. So bear with me while I quickly do that. I know it's noisy, but it hopefully shouldn't take too long. I may have to just dab a little bit as well. Now, you may be able to see that despite the embossing, some of the stamped imagery has disappeared, but I'll show you in a minute what you can do about that, because there's always ways around it. Now, what we need to do still is the branches. So for that, I'm going to use a brownish color, and I decided to use pumice stone. It's a bit too wet. I'm going over the edges again, but I don't mind that because it's almost like a shadow. And again, in a moment, I'll show you how you can deal with that. All right, now, while the actual berries are still drying off a bit, I'm going to show you something else. You see, these leaves are very detailed. I would like to add a bit more detail. I'm full of admiration how Paper Artsy, who produces these stamps, has managed to create all this wonderful detail from Alison's hand-painted and drawn images. But you know, I think some of the detail does get lost a bit. So, but you can just add some more detail in. So what I'm using for this is a brown 0.5 micron pen. And if I'm lucky, it might actually work for me. And yeah, I'm just adding some more veins, just add a little bit more sort of realistic detail. I'm going over this because some of it has disappeared. Yeah, it's giving up a bit on me, but we'll see. And I'm also going to fill in a bit more of this just with the fine pen. I think I need to start to invest in a new one. Because unfortunately, it's dried up a bit. Still, you get some imprint of it still. Now, let's have a good look at it. To me, it still looks flat. So I now want to bring in some more light. Now, we're lucky that kind Mr. Holtz has provided us also with picket fence, if I can find it. Here it is, hopefully another long box. Here we go. So I'm going to take out the picket fence, make sure my brush is well cleaned now, and add just little touches of white to it. And you'll see hopefully what will happen. My one is still a bit wet. Okay, another little blast with the heat gun. I'm trying to hurry this a little bit so that the video doesn't become too long and it doesn't pay off. It works better if you give yourself more time. I'm just saying that. I'm going to add a little bit more detail into these berries as well. Bring that back. You know, another way around would be to emboss it with dark brown, but I don't have dark brown embossing powder. That's why I stamped in brown and then added with clear embossing powder. Now, if you still want more highlights, you can do that with the help of a white pen. I never quite know how that is working. Sometimes they work really well, sometimes they don't. This one is giving up already. Anyway, I think you get the idea, which is the main purpose of this. So I'm going to let it properly dry all now, and then we'll come back in a minute to add the background. All right, our little journal card is completely dry now, so now we can start to work on the background. I've chosen 4 normal distressings, bundled sage, forest moss, and then 2 browns, gathered twigs, and ground espresso. And I've also picked a stencil. Now I'm going to start with bundled sage, really to blend it all in to the focal image. So unlike what we did earlier on, starting from the outside and working in. When I say earlier on, I mean in one of my last tutorials. I'm just going to very lightly start here in the middle. Just do it carefully and it should be all right. See, I don't get hard rings. Just do it lightly and it's fine. Maybe make it a little bit darker towards the center. And that's probably almost enough. All right. Now, with the first moss, this time I am going to start from the outside and just work my way in, blending it into the lighter green. I'm very careful, always softly, softly. Circular motions. And now, as the darkest of the ink has washed onto the paper already, I'm just going to add a tiny bit of stenciling just to make the background a bit more interesting. And over here. All right, and now just distress the edges like I always like to do with some gathered twigs. Just to draw all the attention into the focal point. And I think I will also do a tiny bit of background stamping. And I'm going to go back to this stamp set because there's this beautiful bit of text here that actually has to do with all the berries. I'm not going to attempt to stamp it with any details, much more as a sort of background. So I don't need a stamping block this time. Just a tiny little fragment here and there. I have to make sure that I get it the right way up. That would be like me to do that wrong. A little bit here. A little bit here. A tiny bit here and a tiny bit there. That will do. So I'm going to make the outside a little bit darker still with the ground espresso. Just a tiny little edge here. And now for the final touch. Remember how this text is the wrong way around. So while the camera was switched off, I stamped the main image again, cut out the little bit of text. So let's just edge that a little bit as well. And here is a scrap of fabric, sort of cheeseclothy stuff. I'm going to fray it out a bit, stick it on here, put this on top, and then I might cut it a little bit smaller. It's a bit too big for my liking. I colored it a little bit with antique linen. I usually prep a whole lot of this stuff because I don't like it when it's stark white. Not the best scissors to do this with, but hey ho. It will do. I'm just going to use my standard glue, which is art glitter glue, which I think for a bit of fabric, it works absolutely fine. Stick this little thing on. And there you have it. All done. Ready to fit into one of the pockets. But we'll deal with all of that in a follow-up video when we'll also create 2 more journal cards for these bits. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a lovely day and that you have enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.